What's up guys? It's so good to see you. It's been such a long time since I posted a video and I'm sorry I haven't put anything out. I've been going through some personal stuff, but I can assure you all is well. I'm just thrilled to be back posting. And I have something new for you today. Really excited about it. So let's do this. Is it possible to build cool things with a few power tools that anyone can have in their garage? I know the answer to that, and I can show you better than I can tell you. And all you need for this is a circular saw, a drill and/or driver, an orbital sander, an oscillating tool, or a jigsaw, and that should do it. To get started, I'll place a mark at the 48-inch mark of the plywood. This way I can cut it in half. When working with a circular saw, it's a lot more prep work, but it's totally doable. After making a mark on the plywood, I use a straight edge, in this case a piece of lumber, and drew a line across. Now I'll take the measurement from the saw to the edge of the blade, and this can be done on either side. Now I'll take that measurement and measure from the line I previously drew and place the straight edge there. Under the plywood, I have a piece of foam that I took from a TV package. This way I don't cut into the workbench. Now I'll rip the plywood in half. This is the back panel for the desk. I plan to stain this section of the desk, but the rest of it I plan to paint. I just realized the price of plywood went way up, so I'll be using scrap from my plywood cart and piece things together. This is a cutoff from a sheet of plywood I had in my lumber cart. Instead of cutting it in half, what I'll do here is make a cut longer than I need to, then place those on top of each other, and then cut them down to the same dimension. These panels will be used for the top and bottom. These cutoffs will be used for the sides and inner parts of the desk. Now I need to cut these one more time to get them down to the final dimension. I added a larger sheet of plywood underneath, that way I can cut more pieces that size. And to make that straight cut, I clamped a piece of wood at the top to use as a fence. Since these parts are not that big, I can use a speed square to make a cross cut. Of course, I need to get the depth set right first, that way I can cut both pieces at the same time. To make smaller rips, I made sure the saw blade was on the preferred side of the line. The back panel will be attached to the wall using a French cleat system. So in this case, I set the saw to make a 45-degree cut and push the saw through. Now it's just a matter of cutting off the part with the miter end. And together both parts will make the French cleat system. To this point, I've cut the back panel for the desk. I've also cut the top and bottom of the desk and many additional parts to build out the desk. With the parts cut to size, I need to cover the layers of the plywood. To do so, I'll need iron-on edge band, and yes, we'll need an iron. Once I have the edge band secured, I use a cutting tool to cut off the overhang on both sides. The back panel will be distanced away from the wall using these thin cut strips. Now I'll mark and drill these parts so I can build a frame around the back panel. Now it's just a matter of laying out the frame and screwing them in place. This is the bottom of the back panel. The spacing here is much larger than the remaining sides. This way there's no interference with the baseboard once placed on the wall. Making my way to the top side of the panel, I'll attach a spacer here. This way the French cleat can be closer to the frame, bringing it closer to the wall. Now I'll attach the first part to the French cleat system, and you want to make sure that the miter end is facing the right direction. Below the French cleat system, I added a backing. This is to help support the weight of the desk. I placed this in the desired location, but as I continued to build this out, I had a change in the height of the desk, which this part no longer lined up the way I intended it. so I had to add an additional piece, which I'll cover later on in the build. Now I have one small drawer here, this way you can keep a clean desk. To build this drawer, I lay the parts out, then place a mark at the location where I want to create a rabbet cut. Since I'm doing majority of these cuts with a circular saw, I want to make sure I do this efficiently. First, I'll line these two parts up and clamp them together. Then, I'll set the depth of my circular saw. Now, I'll use a speed square to make sure I cut the line straight and then work my way towards the edge. This is the only line that's important to me. Every other cut is going to be random. Now that I've scored these parts with the blade, I'll need to clean this up using a chisel. Now I double check to make sure I can make these parts square, and I'm pretty happy with this. The next challenge here is I need to make a smaller rabbet cut, which is going to be for the drawer bottom. This one is not going to be as easy as the first cut, but it's still doable. Again, if you have a table saw, you should go for it. But in this case, if you have a circular saw, you'll want to set up a platform like I have here. This piece of wood is basically a stop to prevent this part from shifting. And this one is a fence that the saw is going to be running along. It's also holding the plywood down. And the goal is to cut this piece off. Now all my focus will be on holding the saw and making sure I rip along the line and working my way towards the edge. Once I remove enough material, this should break away pretty easy. My biggest concern is to make sure that the bottoms sit good enough. I've done a dry fit and everything looks good, so it's just a matter of gluing the parts together. You can use any clamps that you have, but I prefer to use a band clamp when I'm putting boxes together. These tends to do a really good job with squaring things up. Finally, I spread the glue around to prevent any huge glue squeeze out. Now I'll add the bottom and double check to make sure that the box is squared. And a quick way of making sure the box is straight is measuring diagonally in two different directions and see if the number is the same. If it's not, you may have to shift the box a bit. And finally, I'll place some weight on top of this and let that set up. At this point, I'll start to assemble the frame for the desk. After applying wood glue to the joint, I also ran a bead of wood glue along the top part of the frame. Now I'll line the plywood up to the frame below. I'll start at one of the corners and countersink the hole before installing the screws. Now I'll travel around until I install enough screws to hold the frame to the plywood. Now I'll take a wet rag and clean up all of the glue squeeze out. After deciding how deep I want the drawer to sit within the face, I then install the first drawer track. Then I made a reference mark on the inside panel. Next, I line the track up to that and install it. At the moment, the inside panel is not secured in place. I'm simply holding it together with clamps. By doing it this way, I know I'm going to get the perfect spacing for the drawer once installed. Since I am working upside down, I'm going to take a 1/4 inch sheet of plywood and place it within the frame and then sit the drawer on top of that. This way I have perfect spacing for the drawer from the front to the back, eliminating any wedge or unevenness. I installed the first screw in the front and did the same thing on the other side. Next, I pulled the drawer all the way out and installed the 2 remaining screws on the back side of the slide. While the end divider was held in place with clamps, I outlined it to make it much easier to put back in place. Now I'll run glue within the lines and reclamp it in place and allow the glue to set up. And to add a bit more holding power to this, I drove a couple screws through the back. Finally, I added a clamp to the front and double checked the squaring of this before moving on. I also added a drawer cover to the drawer, and then I installed the drawer in the tracks to check the operation. Instead of installing two drawers, I left this side open for future options. Rather than leaving this space as is, I wanted to take the opportunity to create a secret compartment. So when you look into this area, you should see a false back that eventually pulls away, giving you an option to store things back here if needed. Now I'll glue these parts in place and let the glue set up before moving on to the next step. I reviewed about 5 different options for the secret compartment, but ultimately I simplified things by going with a simple roller catch. While things are open and very accessible, this is the time to go ahead and try to figure out all of the hardware pieces and make sure it all works together. I was able to find these small finger pulls, which made it a nice touch to the build. Now I didn't want large handles because I'm going for a minimal look. Currently I'm working on the drawer cover. The drawer and the drawer cover will be too thick to install this handle, so in this case I have to pin it between the drawer and the drawer cover. After chiseling out this section, I can install the screws and reattach the cover to the drawer. I used the same drawer pull on the secret compartment cover. This will be very hard to see unless you're looking for it. But again, this was just a simple method. You can use many different solutions, whether a string or something to eject it, lots of possibilities. Now I'll shift my focus over to drilling the mounting holes. Now that I have all the holes drilled in the desk frame, I need to transfer these over to the back panel. The easiest way I see is to line up the desk to the back panel where it should be. Then I use the same bit, place it in the hole, and tap it to mark the back panel. Now I can locate the marks and drill the holes. Before drilling all the way through, I use a small bit to make a pilot hole, that way it shows on the other side. Then I flip the panel over, use a larger Forstner bit to drill down through the pilot hole. Now the reason I'm doing this is so that the T-nuts I will be installing will sit below the surface of the plywood. I flipped the board over again and finished drilling all the way from the front side of the back panel all the way through, flipped it back over, and now I can install the T-nuts. At this point, I feel pretty good about the progress on the project. As much as I wanted to permanently attach the bottom and make this all one piece, I figured being able to remove the bottom will make things much easier to assemble. In order to keep a clean setup, adding an outlet to the top of the desk is necessary. To make quick work of this, I use an oscillating tool to cut out the hole. Now I'll do a test fit to make sure this looks good. Once confirmed, I'll go ahead and cut another hole out on the back side of the desk. This way the power cord can pass through the desk and through the back panel. I carried the hole all the way through the back panel and channel out a section for the power cord to turn down and head over to the outlet. I have the parts here laid out for the desk. What's need to be done now is sanding it down, prepare it, and get ready to put a finish on. When it comes to the top of the desk, I'll plug the screw holes using a dowel rod. I'll repeat this for all the remaining holes along the top. And after the glue has set up, I'll go ahead and sand these down. I will be painting this section of the desk, so I'm using Bondo to cover up all the imperfections, the layers of the plywood, and also the joints. After painting the desk, I'll be using a hickory gel stain on the back panel. I only went with one coat of stain on this project because it gave me the look that I was going for. After brushing on the stain, I took a clean rag and wiped it back off. Since the face of the back panel was so large, I decided to use a roller to apply the stain. At this point, there's a lot of stain applied to the panel. I'd probably use about 3 or 4 rags if I went that route to remove the stain. Instead, I use a plastic spreader to remove the excess. With the majority of the stain removed, I can now use a rag to remove the rest of it. So I'll set this off to the side and come back when it's dry. Now I'll take a strip of LED and wrap it around the back panel. I'll also run a bead of hot glue in the corner to help hold on to the LED strip. I routed the tail end of the LED strip to the bottom of the back panel and then passed it up through the frame. Now I'll secure the connector in place with a strap, and this end will be plugged into the controller. This controller has dual output to power 2 separate strips. This way I can route the LED in 2 different directions. So I do have the option to run a strip of LED under the desk and also around the back panel. This is when the fun starts. I'll put it all together and get it ready to mount on the wall. The wall section to the French cleat is cut shorter, this way the back panel can shift. Now to properly line this up, I'll place the French cleat parts together. I'll then make an indication on the side so I know where this is for reference. Now I'll measure from the bottom of the panel to the line. Now that I have this measurement, I can go higher, but I cannot go lower than this number from the floor. Giving the number that was just discovered, I'll place tape on the wall so I can mark on it. I just need to find the location of the studs and place a mark on the tape. I was able to find 3 studs in the wall, which is plenty. Now, if you can pick a wall that has an outlet on it, that would be best. This way you don't have a wire draped across the floor. Just for my reference, I wanted to mark the frame of the back panel onto the wall. This way it doesn't interfere with the wall-mounted section of the French cleat. Now I'll transfer the marks from the tape over to the French cleat. 2 studs is strong enough to hold the tape, but if you have a third, go for it. At each stud location, I'll be using 2 screws. If you notice, I countersink the screw holes, this way the head of the screws didn't interfere with the back panel. Now I'll level and secure the French cleat to the wall. I just want to make sure this works before moving on. Now, although the French cleat is a very strong system, it sits in place, so if you lift up, it can come off. So I'm gonna add a piece of plywood here, right in the center, This way I can secure the back panel to that using one screw, and that would never be an issue. Now I'll locate all the hex bolt to attach the desk to the back panel. Before hanging the back panel, I need to plug in the outlet and the LED strip. So now I'll drive in the safety screw, and this is again to prevent the desk from being lifted off the wall. The location I chose will be hidden when I attach the bottom. Now I'll put the final bolts in and lock it in place. There's enough play in the desk to mount it perfectly leveled. Tightening the bolt pulled everything together, and in the end, the desk is straight. Now it's just a matter of securing the bottom. And as I mentioned, the security screw is no longer visible. So let's take a look at what we have here. I took a nice sheet of plywood, created a back panel, stained it, pieced the desk together with leftover plywood, painted it, built a compact drawer but big enough to store these items, added a recessed power strip with built-in USB, 2 of them, incorporated a secret compartment that can be accessed when this false back is removed. And I just couldn't call it finished without a touch of LED. Now, I'm not saying this desk is strong enough to hold an elephant, but when the weight is distributed properly, it's strong enough to hold 184-pound me. It's possible to have a desk that's not just functional, but one that makes a statement in the room. Whether you work from home or you want to surprise your children with a desk, this was designed to occupy a small space, but most importantly, it delivers the minimal look I was going for with no compromise.